Hello, everyone. I'm Mystery.
And I am Martyrdom the Authenticator, and we are the Duality of Man. And now it is time to do that video on martyrdom that I was thinking we were doing a couple weeks ago, but we weren't. Um, because ever since we covered that one kid who self-immolated for a reason of trying to get people to pay attention to the Israel-Gaza conflict and wanting peace there and so on and so forth, and his own side basically just either shrugged or laughed at him, there's something about that does not just it simply doesn't feel right to me. As as someone who is, a men's rights advocate, even though the guy was a crazy Antifa wackadoo type, and even though I don't agree with his ideology and stuff, there are a few things that make me at least more sympathetic to him than I otherwise would be. And that is one, he very clearly wasn't grifting because he didn't prioritize his self interest over his ideology, which already puts him head and shoulders above the Hassan Pikers and Bosches of the world. And he didn't try to take anybody else with him when he went, so that puts him above all the suicide bombers and serial killers and so on. So like he stuck to his ideology, as malign as I think that ideology is, and he did so in a way that negatively affected him and only him, and he didn't harm anyone else while he was doing it. At least not in that particular action, given that he was an Antifa type. He might have been involved in some mob somewhere later, earlier in the timeline. But at least as far as his self-sacrifice goes, he didn't he didn't grift, he didn't take anybody with him, and he was acting in accordance with and consistently with his ideology. The fact that I disagree with that ideology isn't enough for me to go, well, then we shouldn't talk about him at all. No. I I keep getting reminded of this one quote from Skin Game in the Dresden Files when Michael was talking to Nicodemus, the as different as we are, as separated in time and faith, you are still my brother, you are still a human being, and I am very sorry for your pain. That's kind of where I'm at with this kid, where it's like, very clearly, if we had met in real life, he probably wouldn't have liked me, he probably would have hated my guts, but he's not a grifter, and he didn't hurt anybody but himself in his final act, so that in and of itself is respectable. And it's utterly ugly to me that the people who are ostensibly on his side just sort of went, lol, privileged white boy, haha, and then didn't talk about it any further. Um,
Like, regarding the people on his own side who disregarded his death, there was one thing that occurred on social media after people found out about it. A lot of people were saying, you know, RIP, rest in power, which is a really dumb phrase because what do the dead need power for? But also, it's a fact that when people were saying that, other people said, "No, you shouldn't say that. That's only for black people who die," which was really the dumbest thing ever.
because
After
only
this
black
guy,
people have any need for hypothetical power or comfort in the afterlife, I guess.
yeah, which is just like after this guy sacrificed himself for their ideals and their beliefs, like they're they're not even
To,
going
to
to
get to its logical outcome, basically.
they don't even give him the honor of the you know progressive equivalent of the last rites.
Yeah, the same free, because in a world where I had more respect for Antifa and those sorts of people, I would have expected this kid to at least get the same level of respect that George Floyd got, because George Floyd wasn't even ideologically associated with them and didn't die in the name of anything that they were espousing, no matter what the revisionist narrative afterwards would tell you. This guy literally does, to the letter, follow the ideology up to and including the point at which it is detrimental to his health. And not only can't they be asked to give a shit, a lot of them just went, lol, look at the self immolating white boy, haha. And I just,
Yeah,
it disgusts me. no matter what you die for, as long as you do so in like logical consistency with your beliefs and you don't hurt anyone else in the fulfillment of them, and you're not like being opportunistic or grifting, that should in my schema of the world be at least somewhat respectable. Even if I disagree with the motives and axioms that drove you there, you were consistent with your beliefs, you didn't harm anybody, and you didn't grift while you were at it. So what am I supposed to disagree with you with on other than, the ideological aspect?
Yeah, with the comparison to George Floyd is really wild because George Floyd was a repeat offender who was a drug addict and who most likely died due to an overdose. While this guy actually died, you know, for his beliefs, as you know, bizarre as his actions were, he at least died like standing on his own convictions.
Yeah, being consistent with his beliefs up into and including the point at which it requires self-sacrifice from him, which is
Well,
more,
here's the
again,
thing.
more than I can say for the Voshes and the Hassans, who basically will alter their beliefs or will special plead their beliefs on a dime, literally, as long as they're getting paid that dime at the end.
Well, I would like to compare this with the martyrs of say like Christendom in the past because usually um, in the past martyrs were people who you know they did die, but they were people who you know defended their faith and their beliefs usually against someone who was aggressing towards them. It's because like in Christendom, like obviously committing suicide is a considered a mortal sin, so they weren't killing themselves, but they were basically sacrificing themselves by standing up against somebody who was trying to kill them.
Yeah. And
So like
usually it
how
did
did
involve death, which there is also a gendered component there, which we'll get into because, this is
like from
a
your
men's
personal
rage.
point of view, like how does somebody who intentionally took his own life for his beliefs compare to somebody who stood up against somebody else and died for their beliefs?
Well, I don't know as it's entirely all that cut and dry all the time because sometimes when you're in a state of quote unquote oppression, sometimes you do need to take things into your own hands just to get people's attention. And
True. I mean, I agree,
while
but
obviously neither you nor I believe that the Western civilization is oppressive, this guy genuinely did believe it, and so he genuinely did believe that in order to get a spotlight on the process of peace, he needed to do this, and he was willing to go all the way and not harm anyone else while he was doing it. So
true. But I think the issue here is that this guy was, if he was a Jewish person or Israeli or a Palestinian, I would disagree with him taking his own life, but I would more understand. Whereas this guy was an American, former member of the military, so in a way, while he believed in peace, he was in a way outside the conflict because he was not part of the two groups that were engaging in the conflict.
I didn't realize he was ex-military. It's possible, given that he was ex-military, that he essentially blamed himself in part for the problem, because a soldier is at least in part to blame for war, at least on a certain kind of paper. So maybe it was partially to also, sort of wipe his sins clean, to use more religious language,
Possibly.
as
I
well
mean,
as.
the progressives do hate the military.
Yeah. So like maybe it was a combination of, in doing this I will wipe my sins clean, and also I will bring a brighter spotlight to peace, which in his defense should have worked in a sane world where people were consistent with the beliefs that he died for. But unfortunately, we don't live in a sane world. We live in a world where someone can literally lay down their lives for your beliefs and be entirely consistent with them in doing so. And you will laugh at best and just shrug indifferently at worst.
One hang up that I have is that what did he hope that he would accomplish? I mean, obviously, I hope he hoped that he would accomplish peace, but when you look at the factors of it, I mean, this is a conflict with a very, very long history, with religious and geopolitical reasons tied into it, and these two sides have a vehement hatred of each other, especially considering what happened on October 7th. So considering, like, again, that he wasn't part of either group, like, did he really believe that him being a third party coming in here, even if he did sacrifice himself, would convince either group to back down, considering what was at stake?
I hazard a guess that maybe he thought that because he was a neutral party in the thing, maybe him sacrificing himself would get both sides to stop and turn and pay attention. Which, again, in a sane world probably would have worked and should have worked, but we are far from a sane world, and so everyone just sort of chuckled a bit and then shrugged, which makes me sick.
Yeah, the thing is, the Palestinians don't view the progressives as their friends. They view them as useful idiots to help them win the propaganda war.
Or just idiots. I don't even know how useful they find them all the time, but that's neither here nor there. But yeah, I know. But even if the Palestinians or the Israelis didn't bother paying attention, in a slightly less sane but probably more plausible world, he again should have at least gotten the same level of reverence that George Floyd got, considering they literally had to fill in the gaps of the George Floyd narrative with ideological gobbledygook, whereas this guy literally was straight up basically doing what they sort of attribute George Floyd for having done, even though there's no
Well, I
evidence
think
he ever did so or even had any notion of ever doing so.
well, I think one of the reasons why it didn't get as much attention from the progressives is because because normal people could watch the body cam footage from the George Floyd incident, and based on that could feel sympathy for
Hmm.
George Floyd because the footage looks really bad. But with this guy, immolating himself, I think the average person just looks at him like he's insane.
And that's another problem I had with a lot of people just writing him off as insane when there's no evidence that he ever had any like schizophrenic delusions or hallucinations or anything. All we have evidence of is him believing in a rather toxic ideology and taking that toxic ideology to its logical extreme without either grifting or taking people with him. So there again, I'm left with the okay. You and I disagree on ideological ideological terms, but importantly, you didn't harm anybody apart from yourself when you did it, and you didn't do so opportunistically drifting, and you were entirely consistent with your ideology as much as I disagree with it. So at least on some kind of paper, that puts him head and shoulders above the suicide bombers. It puts him head and shoulders above the Voshes and the Hassan Pikers, and it puts him above the like warped manifesto having serial killer types. So like at the
Now,
very least, the fact that he was willing to sacrifice himself and did so in a consistent manner with his beliefs and shit without harming anybody else does merit some kind of like reverence.
well, let me ask you something. Do you think these are beliefs, these beliefs that he sacrificed himself for? Do you think these are genuine beliefs that he came to after critical thought and careful consideration, or do you think that this is something that he was basically you know brought into by outside influences?
It's hard to ever fully make that determination, especially post hoc, because obviously he didn't survive the thing. Um, I'm willing to at least I'm willing to at least consider that he might have been led into it, but then again, who isn't sometimes led into certain aspects of their beliefs? And obviously, it would have been better maybe if he had had the capacity to question them. But maybe this was a case of, as is so often the case by ideologies, they take in the vulnerable, the psychologically warped, the people looking for a purpose or a meaning or just the ability to think that you matter somehow, and then they hand them the holy book and go, this is how you prove that you're a good and moral and pure person, and this is how you make a difference in the world, and so on. And then and then the guy goes along and he takes that to heart and he acts on it consistently, and then he dies, and the people that probably recruited him to this cult laugh at him. And that's the part that really sticks in my craw. Like, I wouldn't be doing this defense of him if we lived in a world where he got the George Floyd treatment, because I would at least be looking at that going, yes, that's right. That's good. That's right for him to be lionized by his people given what he did. But we don't live in the world where they George Floyded him. We live in the world where they maybe spared a laugh or two and then went, ha ha, white boy, and then shrugged and moved on with their life. Like, it didn't even last a full news cycle. And there's also something I think wrong with that. Like, someone gave their life in a very, like, overt way for as warped as the ideology he believed in was. He didn't hurt anybody. He wasn't a grifter or opportunistic, and he wasn't inconsistent with his beliefs. So are we not going to at least wonder how he got there, or indeed what is to be done about people who think like him? Because there are, I'm sure, plenty of people like him out there still who, you know, they got told this is how you be a good person, so they are going to act accordingly, and in so doing, probably destroy themselves.
I mean, I
we
could
we can't
appreciate
even
the
we can't
man.
even have the radicalization conversation, because all too often in the news cycle, radicalization is something referred to, something reserved for people who get radicalized in a direction we don't prefer or doesn't align with the Overtundo, i.e., usually right wing, cough cough. But
Also, the word radicalization gets thrown around on things that most people would find very reasonable because that word radicalization was thrown around when parents were upset when they found out what things were being taught to their children in schools.
hmm
They talk about radical parents groups and things like that. But really, I do feel really bad for the guy because you know, wanting to sue for peace is a noble thing, but the ideology that he had come to that conclusion from, like, led him to taking his own life, which is sad because if he was still alive, he could continue to take steps to try and sue for peace and see where things were working, where things weren't working. But with this desperate act, you basically just have to hope that this such an extreme thing will have an effect, and it didn't, which is really
and we
sad.
can blame his ideological comrades for not lionizing him like they probably should have done. But I
I mean,
wanted to. Sorry,
but
go
I
ahead.
just want to say one thing. It's really disgusting, like this guy sacrificing his life, and then the people that they do lionize. Because do you remember when they tried to lionize that trans person that shut up the Christian school?
hmm
Like that person killed people and committed a heinous crime, but this guy, sacrificed himself in the name of peace, and they barely say anything.
Even more disturbing than that, and even more recent than that. Remember how they tried to lionize the, like, 6'7" kid who beat the shit out of his teacher for taking, I believe it was a Nintendo DS away from him, or was it a Switch? I don't remember, but
I
he,
I think it was a switch, but still, I was really, really messed up, and like they wanted to try the person as an adult when they should, because like if if they can become that violent just over having a video game taken away in school, then they really are a danger to society.
and
Because
not
there
for
are
nothing, but he was certainly physiologically an adult, if not psychologically. Uh, because so I've seen pictures of the dude. He looks like a freaking mountain.
There are a lot more, stressful and triggering things in the world than losing your video game to your teacher.
For probably the rest of the class period, and then she probably would have given it back. Let's be
Yeah,
honest. That's usually how this works.
this person just displayed an absolute lack of self-control, which is dangerous, especially if he gets older and is able to get his hands on something like a firearm.
And even without a weapon, he apparently was large enough to be his own weapon quite significantly. And that too must be taken into account. But yeah, no, the kid who, in the name of peace, however ideological and warped his justification for peace was, kid self-immolates himself in the name of peace, and the people he ideologically aligns with either laugh and mock him or they just shrug and don't care. Period. But the overtly criminal, mini Hulk who beats the shit out of his teacher um for taking away his video game. Oh, that kid's just Aladdin. I'm sure he was just having a really really bad day at home or something. And no, fuck that. But more to the point, and back to the martyrdom point of today's show. That incident did spark me off in thinking about this, but it did also make me think of all the other ways in which men men disproportionately and men specifically are taught that self-sacrifice is in many cases the only way they can be noble or worthwhile as men. And whether it's ideological or religious martyrdom, or whether it's simply being a Tommy in World Wars One and Two, and getting sent off into the human meat grinder that is industrial warfare. It is more often men. Obviously, there are also female martyrs throughout various different religious traditions and ideological traditions and whatnot. But the thing about quite a lot of the female saints and female martyrs are a lot of them survive, or a lot of them are uh, sainted for things they did with their lives, whereas a disproportionate amount of the male martyrs and saints of various different ideological traditions are specifically not saints or martyrs until they die, and die usually pretty overtly, and usually pretty violently, and usually very self-sacrificially. And
Or they
there
have to
is
do something truly epic.
yeah, there is something to be said for a woman can be a saint without necessarily dying for it. A man most often can't. Um, and even then, going back to the war example, a lot of the men who returned from World War Two and World Wars One and Two, and benefited, for example, from the GI Bill. We don't serve your kind in here, and or the GI Bill was the institution of the patriarchy, blah blah. So like that, for a lot of men, just like for this kid here, there's even no guarantee that your sacrifices will be acknowledged, let alone respected. In fact, in a lot of cases, you can do as much as you possibly can to martyr yourself and get shamed for it when the crisis has passed.
But regarding soldiers, I feel that's a bit different, especially in World War II, because the threat was very, very real, and after Pearl Harbor, it obviously very close to home.
I mean, yes, but even so, industrial trench warfare being what it is, a lot of the individual soldiers were more or less anonymized, and were basically viewed as human meat for the human meat grinder.
True, especially with the propaganda. Have you ever seen the World War I propaganda? It's just
Yeah, a
like
lot of it is very
it's so
disturbing.
more as an adventure.
Yeah. Again, the motivating of men through the carrot of if you do this, we will view you as real men. Whether they actually end up doing that or not is a completely separate question. Because again, a lot of the heroes of both world wars came home to find that they might have had one day of parade, but after that parade was over, so was your quote unquote free ride as a soldier or playing off of valor. And a
But
lot of a lot of the survivors of wars get demonized after the war is over.
speaking of you know talking about cajoling people into joining war by saying if they're a real man, they'll do this. Like a lot of people, like I think especially like in World War I, where the women would shame men for not joining up for the army by giving them these flowers. I forget which one it was.
I believe it was a white flower. I don't remember which specific one it was, but there was a similar thing in Canada with a white feather campaign. Weren't they white lilies? Because that's where the phrase "lily white" comes from as a descriptor for cowards. I think that was right. I might be being slightly apocryphal here, but I'm pretty sure I remember reading somewhere that that was the thing. The phrase "lily white" being associated with cowardice comes from giving men white lilies for not for draft dodging.
Let me see. It was the white feather.
Yeah. But yeah. Uh, that very much sacrifice yourself in the industrial war machine, or will remove your man card from you attitude is nothing new.
Yeah, the thing is like World War I. Like I think people were basing this off of wars that they had known in the past, but obviously it was now like the mechanized warfare of World War I was a completely different animal. Like it basically turned
Yeah,
war into just like a meat grinder, like the Zap Brannigan approach to warfare from
that yeah
Ukraine.
that's
Just send
why
wave after wave of your own men at the
that's
enemy.
why I explicitly mentioned World Wars One and Two, because at least in wars prior to that, at least prior to industrial war, there were tactics and battle lines and um, squadrons and platoons and things. In the industrial warfare of World Wars One and Two, it was basically we're going to dig a muddy, bloody, ridiculous hole, and your job is going to be to stay in the muddy, bloody, ridiculous hole, and to hope that you don't get bombed, and or that the mud and blood don't eventually coalesce around your legs and give you things like clubfoot. Because I don't know if you know much about the injuries just sustained from the trenches themselves, like being in the
I've heard,
trenches,
I've heard of
but
trench foot.
it's really dark.
Yeah, and also oftentimes like you're stuck there, so you're basically really relying on supply lines, and if like the enemy cuts off the supply lines, like you're screwed. I remember like I saw some photos in a class once where they got so desperate they started hunting the rats that would run through the trenches.
Yeah. Yeek. But on the bright side, for those commanding the battle from the safety of Washington back home, at least you're already in the hole, so we don't have to dig another grave for you.
In a way, it was kind of like a mutual siege where you were essentially in a way both laying siege to each other.
hmm That's one of the truly miraculous thing about the Christmas Day armistice there, where everyone just decided, you know what, it's Christmas, screw this, I'm not being an inhumane monster today.
Yeah, that was a very beautiful moment, and of course, after that, the commands of both armies decided to send them both to different areas. We need these guys to kill each other for our political bullshit. We can't
Yeah,
have peace.
we need these people demonizing and dehumanizing each other as much as possible. We can't possibly have them see each other as humans, because once they see each other as humans, they won't want to shamelessly murder everyone. Derp. Which is in and of itself a good segue to another casualty of men's, somewhat innate desire for self-sacrifice, namely PTSD. A large part of PTSD comes from the fact that in order to be a killer, which is in many cases what a soldier must be, you have to dehumanize your enemy. Well, if you can't fully dehumanize your enemy, then you basically have to walk around with the guilt of, I willingly chose to kill someone that I know full well was human, and now I'm gonna have to be scarred by that for the rest of my life.
Well, here's the thing. I think it's not necessarily that because, for example, like you could like take somebody's life in self defense, and it might be very harmful to you psychologically, but you could eventually come to terms with that. But
Cope
I
with
think
it,
what it
yeah.
is that I think what it is that in war, human beings, like from a biological evolutionary level, are not built to witness this vast level of carnage and slaughter.
Which again just goes to prove how much worse the problem got once we industrialized warfare. Um, my kingdom for battle lines and formations. God damn it.
You know, human beings like are not evolved to like withstand this type of environment. Now you could try and break them down enough to turn them into a soldier that's capable of fighting and killing other people, like that was shown in the movie. I believe it was Full Metal Jacket.
Yeah.
But like that's not what a human being is supposed to be or do.
Yeah, what once you basically rip apart someone's soul and stitch it back together to be a robot for your war machine, don't be surprised if the end result means that they'll never fully get their humanity back.
Yeah,
And
and then you have to try and bring those people back after it's over into civilian life, and then it's no wonder that they're going to have problems.
whereupon they will be demonized by feminists who claim that this is toxic masculinity and that this is a male disease and that this is a male problem, and therefore men are subhuman monsters and we should fucking revolt against them.
And
And
it's
that yet
funny
the only
because
people who aren't accountable to this are the very often sociopathic politicians who turned all of these otherwise decent men into robots of death.
and it's hilarious because a lot of the leftist progressive women who would shame American soldiers, especially after the Iraq and Afghanistan war, were like fully on board for the Russia Ukraine conflict.
Yeah, it's funny, or maybe not. Well, certainly not funny, haha, but certainly funny in an ironic way. That ever since women have been given the votes, a lot of the things they voted for have been wars in which the majority of the casualties will be men and boys.
Well, here's the thing, like I think it's a bit different because if you're a man, especially if you set up for things like the draft or selective service, like if you elect the wrong person, they may get you into a war in which you may have to end up fighting. But women feel no such weight, weighing on their conscience when they go to vote. So like if somebody says, "Oh, we're gonna go to war, defeat these people," like they're usually thinking about how that makes them feel rather than the consequences that
Yeah,
may fall on them
is
if that
this
actually
turning me
passes.
on, basically? And some of them can even convince themselves that women are the true victims of war. Cough, cough, Hillary Clinton.
like I've seen like some of those arguments. They've asked that question multiple times on the whatever dating podcast, and it just astonishes me how they can argue that though they know that the men are forced to go off and die and fight the enemy and face all kinds of horrors and bombs and things, they'll still say that women are most affected.
This is why I'm so anal retentively upset whenever the real man standard shows its ugly head, because it invariably and inevitably results in re- removing from men any concern for their personhood, any concern for their souls, any concern for their humanity, and instead looking at them the way you look at a very expensive, very finicky appliance, or bodyguard, or resource magnet. And I'm never going to be okay with that. I'm never going to be okay with the fact that your entire gender role as a man is just be the warm bodies that throw themselves at the enemy so that the people we actually give a shit about, which is usually women and or children, and even then the care we have for young boys does not last nearly as long or even be nearly as intense to begin with as we do for young girls. So very often children is just a buzzword for girls, which is in of itself a problem. But I'm just never going to be okay with that whole your entire gender role as a man is to have no needs, no vulnerabilities, no humanity or personhood of any kind, and you will be entirely judged based on your capacity to function properly as the luxury appliance that women have to then pay for.
Well, here's the thing though, like that's how they want you to be, but then they'll complain that you aren't showing enough emotion or you aren't opening up enough. But the thing is, like, that's they say that, but that's not in
The,
reality what they want from you.
these two things are mutually exclusive. You can either have a fellow partner through life who you care about the personhood and agency and so on of, or you can have the Protector Bot 2000 who has no feelings or emotions of substance.
Yeah, I mean,
A- a-
you could have the guy who opens himself up to you, or you could have the Terminator essentially.
and somehow feminists in particularly, but gynocentric women in general, will find a way to be mad at both of these extremes because they essentially want the Terminator post Terminator 2, where yes, he still has the robotic tendencies, but he also is learning how to be quote unquote human.
Yeah,
They want someone with the powers and moral compass of Superman and like the soulful vulnerability of I can't even think of a good character example, but that's basically what women want. They want someone who is as morally perfect and emotionally intelligent as Superman, who also has the powers of Superman. And anyone who falls short of that paragon standard is, for varying degrees, you know, wicked off the side as not admissible to the category of real man.
yeah. Another example of a character like that would be basically Captain America,
Yeah,
where he's strong and morally upright, but also tough and tenacious.
yeah, and simultaneously also sensitive and capable of understanding people's emotions and being kind to everyone at all times.
Yeah. So like, there's it's very 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 difficult to be that, and and even if you do, like, what do you gain?
Yeah, because nobody ever even a Superman or a Captain America, very few characters ever actually return the favor. Very few characters ever actually, wonder about how are Steve or Clark feeling about being burdened with all this responsibility. Granted, there are characters who do, and that's why those characters do have friends, and that's good. But like so many people basically expect the morally perfect paragons to show up and never have any problems of their own that need showing, and it's so extreme and so instinctive in a lot of cases that even if a woman is otherwise attracted to a man, if he shows a moment of weakness, a moment of emotional breakdown, her lady parts will dry up faster than the Mojave Desert after a drought.
Yeah.
So
They basically want um they basically want Galahad from Arthurian legend. But
yeah,
the thing is Galahad wouldn't even date them anyway. He was a Sigma male to the very end.
well, yeah, Galahad with the strength of Hercules and the bank balance of King Midas.
Yeah, but yeah, speaking of that, another way that we could look at men in martyrdom is the fact that oftentimes men have to do very dangerous jobs that they don't want to do purely for the sake of earning money for the family, and oftentimes the family is very ungrateful for the stuff that he has to do.
Yeah, and that is even presaged in our stories and our mythology as well. What is the job of the noble knight? To slay the fucking dragon. Nobody ever stops and thinks, now wait a minute, it's a fucking dragon that breathes fire. Why are we expecting a human man to be able to slay this dragon? But no, the noble knight that gets the girl slays the dragon, or he gets nothing.
Well, first of all, if you could actually slay a dragon, you get to flex on everyone that you slew a dragon.
Well, yes, but my point is, it's kind of similar to the. I think I showed that video to you, the base fizz video about the guy who outran his girlfriend when they were running from a bear, and everyone like shamed him for it because they wanted him to like stand and do battle with the bear. It's very much a similar thing. If dragons were physical beings, which I do think there are dragons, but I believe they exist in spirit form. But that's neither here nor there. But if dragons existed as physical beings, they would be even more apex predators than bears, lions, tigers, etc. And yet, so much of our mythology basically goes, "Hey, man, just generic man, go and slay the giant fire breathing lizard the size of a house, or you're not a real man and you don't deserve the princess."
Well, here's the thing: I would never try and fight a bear just for a girlfriend. Like, if she's my wife and the mother of my child, I would probably, but like that's what it would have to be. Like,
Hmm.
it would have to be like I basically dedicated my life and have built a family with this woman, and like obviously, here's the thing: even if it's a freaking bear, I at least still have the slightest chance of surviving, as opposed to the woman who basically has no chance whatsoever.
Right, but still, there is a bit of a lopsided set of expectations here. The man is sort of by default, as we saw in that case with the bear video. It's sort of expected by default that if you're a man and you don't feel up to trading blows with the bear, or the dragon, or the tiger, or the what the fuck ever, or the pack of wolves, then your man card is revoked, as far as we can tell.
Question: did the woman die from the bear? Or did she live?
I don't I don't know. I believe so. I think
She
sh
she
I,
lived.
I think they both lived, but
What the hell are people complaining
everyone was
about?
morally shaming the guy for running away instead of
Look, if the
instead of
woman
standing
died,
firm and doing battle with the bear like freaking Grizzly Adams or some shit.
if the bear died, then and he just like ran away and didn't even try to help her, then yeah, I can understand that. Because here's the thing: like, even if you don't want to sacrifice yourself, you should at least try and help. But if they got away and both survive, shut the hell up.
Yeah. On the other hand, are we ever going to ask ourselves the question: is it reasonable to expect men to like become become Tarzan as and when the situation calls for it? Because that's the thing. It's not even that he. It's not even that some people necessarily expected him to do battle with the bear. It was that it was such the implicit assumption that annoyed me. Because it's like you're telling me that in order to be even qualified as a man, you expect every man on the planet to be capable of, when the situation calls for it, fighting with one of nature's foremost apex predators.
Yeah, so
And
it's like,
yet,
to, but it's to be a real man, you have to, make enough money, take care of your girlfriend and children, engage in mortal combat with a wild animal that outclasses you in basically every stat except intelligence.
yeah, basic, basically, like again, they want someone with the moral purity of Galahad, the strength of Hercules, and the bank balance of King Midas, and the combined handsomeness of all of the above.
Yeah, so like the thing is though, I feel like a lot of guys are just saying that even if we were to do these things, it's just not worth it. Like the women that who are asking us to do these things like aren't good people. Because here's the thing, like I've seen a lot of um interviews with women who, they'll say they want the guy to be all these things, and even then, at the end of the day, they still basically look at him like a wallet.
Yeah, but no incumbent responsibility. I did see that also in relation to the bear video. Um, Several comments were like, "Wait, these are the men we're supposed to be submissive to," and I'm like, "Okay, so you're telling me that unless the man is capable of going full on Hulk on a bear, then he's not worthy of any sort of deference or respect or submission on your part."
Yeah, but
Gotcha.
here's the thing,
That's
like there is basically no winning because if he ran away from the bear, they called him a coward. If he would have stood and fought the bear and died, they would have called him an idiot for trying to fight a bear. Really, the only way he could have gotten out of this with a positive outcome was to fight the bear and win.
and survive long enough to tell the tale, basically.
Yeah, if he didn't like get grievous injuries and die shortly after.
Yeah. So you have to be powerful enough to fight the bear, not so powerful that we no longer have evidence of you having fought the bear, but powerful enough to fight the bear and survive and live long enough to tell the tale and pass on your genes. That is the like implicit narrative we're all supposed to instinctively believe, and many women actually for real do believe. It seems.
Yeah, that
But we
reminds me
but
of
we
this.
can't ever but we can't ever have sympathy for men sacrificing themselves, and we can't ever ask the question: are those sacrifices in any way worth it? And should men actually be expected to live up to a standard that fucking high in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, it's like a guy could, work his entire life to, be all these things, and you know, even if he were to, get women who, acknowledge all these traits in him, like, is that woman going to, have the, traits that the man is looking for and reciprocate the care that he is expected to give her? Because the other thing, like, it seems like now in a lot of times, like, a lot of women are not, reciprocating the care that they expect from their boyfriends or husbands.
No, because a lot of them think that they are inherently better and inherently more morally pure than any man whatsoever. Hence, all they need to do or all they need to do is show up and be women, and that should be enough somehow. Like, what do you mean? I brought my womanhood. Isn't that enough?
So, let me ask you something. Do you think that, in to bring it back to the guy who, immolated himself, do you think that we are going to see any copycats of him, or is this just like a, one time, surprise incident?
I don't think we will see any copycats because he didn't get the George Floyd treatment. If he had, we might have seen a couple more. But people did affect as absolutely repugnant and disgusting and dehumanizing as I think it is. His side basically just went lol, useless white guy immolates himself, lol, and then shrugged. And the people on the right basically just all went, well, obviously he was crazy. He couldn't have had any, greater moral point to make or anything. So, like, no one gave a shit about this guy except for us, it seems. So, like, it. I don't think there will be any copycats because there's no incentive for if I do this, then people will pay attention to me, or if I do this, I will matter to society, or something like that. Unlike
Yeah.
George Floyd, who it now seems like there are copycats of, or they make copycats of anyone they can get their hands on.
Well, they're trying, but none of them seem to have had the same impact.
No, they they still there's basically at least one pseudo George Floyd in the news cycle now. Um,
Yeah, there was
per
one
per like
recently.
week.
There was one recently. I forget his name, but they tried to make a martyr out of him because he was shot by the police. But and then body cam footage came out that he was shooting at the police first, and that basically squashed the entire narrative.
hmm It's
So
and meanwhile, all the while, what are we doing? We're vilifying the police, and who also put their lives on the line more often than they probably don't. That would be police. Now, obviously, statistically, there are a certain percentage of um, high authority occupation that has sociopaths in it. Hence, there will always probably be bad cops. But for every one of those, there are like five who are at least, wanting to do something right with their jobs. And yet, when George Floyd happened, or when Emmett Till happened, or when um what the fuck was the name of the kid who accidentally got shot that one time? When any of those incidents happen, it's not it's not the person being shot that should be the problem. It's not the it's not the system in which he grew up, or the social group he found himself in. No, it's an excuse to go defund the police. And yet, speaking of martyrs who don't get enough respect, um, Kyle Rittenhouse, he was in one of those very dehumanizing situations, rather similar to war, although obviously not a war, a riot, but very similar, especially given that he was like 17 at the time. And people morally shamed him for crying on the stand that he had to shoot people. Now, mind you, had he not cried, had he not made a quote unquote baby of himself, they would have bitched at him for obviously being a sociopath because he didn't cry. So there was literally no way for him to be seen as morally valid from that. All that did was get a bunch of people going, see, this is why we need more gun control. What, you mean so the kid can get a fucking um skateboard to the face and die, probably, or be beaten the shit out of, at any rate.
Now, let me ask you something.
Hmm.
Now, we know that we're probably not going to get any more you know copycats from this guy. But do you think that the radical progressives will attempt to modern themselves in different ways? Because we see they're doing a lot of protests against the war thing, including like shutting down like bridges and major traffic areas.
I think you'll always get the Antifa types and the Just Stop Oil types and the Extinction Rebellion types, pseudo martyring themselves as much as possible. But I'm I don't think the sad thing is I think there are far too many opportunists and grifters and people who just gosh darn it don't think their own rules apply to them. Um, for there to be enough people to martyr. I mean, this kid's case is a perfect example of this. In a sane world where people actually sincerely held to these standards, he would have been the next George Floyd or the next whomever, but he wasn't because when push came to shove, they prioritized the grift or the opportunism over being consistent with their principles. Fundamentally, because they don't even seem to consider consistency of principle to be a principle they hold to, which is confusing in and of itself.
Yeah, it really does appear that the only principle they hold to is the accumulation of power.
And or like moral legitimacy. Because I do think they genuinely believe that there's some moral component of the things they do. I just think they all are also very good at talking themselves out of the natural implications of their beliefs a lot of the time. And so when they see someone like this guy actually taking those axioms to heart and acting on them, one wonders if part of the reason they chose to ignore him was because they felt morally guilty that they weren't willing to do something similar to him.
It's like that they believe that the things to do that the things they do will lead to something much better, and so that justifies whatever actions they have to take in order to get there.
Yeah, the greater good.
That never leads to anything good.
No, literally never. No one has ever done anything good on the basis of the greater good. Because because most people who actually do good on a case by case basis, and that overall brings the world to a better place.
Yeah, it's basically the same argument that I made with the national abortion ban that some conservatives want to push. I said that that's not going to, really work out in the long term, and that what they need to do is basically convince people state by state to ban it in their state.
Well, and I made the same argument when Obama put the executive order out for gay marriage. I'm like, even as a gay person, I would have rather you would have waited until the actual, the actual temperature of the metaphorical water the frog was in was better so that you could have gotten your, gay marriage amendment because, it takes, I believe it's two-thirds of the states to ratify something for it to become an amendment. And I think if they had waited, if they had actually done the fair-minded thing and just waited until most people were okay with gay people, they could have actually gotten a gay marriage amendment and all would have been better. But they had to force their hand to make the moral grandstand, and then all of a sudden now the people who have difficulties with gay people feel morally vindicated and victimized, so they have all the more reason to push back. And now the acceptance of gay people is actually going down. Why? Because of the overt bullshit of the we will convert your children crowd.
Yeah,
You know,
it's like you got what you wanted. Now there's most people are chill, but there's a lot of people just being assholes.
Yeah, and what cause does this help? It certainly doesn't help the pro-gay cause. It only seems to be helping the people who think that people like me should be castrated, chemically or otherwise. And that doesn't sound like a good future for me. Now you can call that selfish if you like, but I also don't think that it's good for humans in general to, as we just went over. I don't think it's good in general for humans to dehumanize each other because when
Yeah, I mean, I also have similar concerns in regarding to race relations. Obviously, I'm black, and like a lot of the crime that's being committed in a lot of these major cities and a lot of these like assaults and murders and stuff, it's being committed by a small percentage of black people. But the thing is, like, they're not getting justice; they're just getting let out back into the street by these like ultra liberal district attorneys and police forces. And so like the public sees this and they start disliking black people, assuming like this is the majority of us, when it's really not, and we hate this just as much as anybody.
Yeah, let alone all the times where the George Floyd syndrome happens and these people actually get lionized for the terrible shit they do.
Yeah, so like I really want like I want all those people in jail, because them not being in jail is making like a large percentage of the black community look bad.
And it's very funny when you consider that for a while there, in the late 80s through the 90s and into the 2000s, the actual like multicultural experiment was working. Because I remember growing up on shows like, Family Matters, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, The Boondocks, even stuff like The Proud Family and Codename Kids Next Door and um, Shaolin Showdown and stuff like that. And those shows, the basic premise of those shows was people of all different walks of life could coexist perfectly and be individual characters with their own individual identities, not an extension of some stereotype somewhere. And everything, for the most part, from what I was aware of, was better, like objectively better, because we didn't assume that everyone around us who was different than us was somehow out to get us, or was secretly a fascist, or was secretly a communist, or was secretly, a groomer, or something. And for a while there, it worked. And then along comes the social justice movement going, yes, but shouldn't we focus more on identity and ideology?
Yeah,
And now,
do you remember Malcolm in the Middle?
yes.
All right, so in Malcolm in the Middle, they have this. It was obvious Malcolm in the Middle was about you know, a white working class family with a gifted son. But
Hmm.
like one of the characters they introduced was this character called Stevie, who was also very intelligent, and he was black
In a
and
wheelchair.
disabled.
Yeah.
Yeah, the thing is, like, despite the differences that they had, and also Stevie came from a upper middle
Very wealthy
class
family.
family. Yeah, and the thing is, even though they had all these differences, they still ended up becoming very good friends. Stevie and the main character Malcolm, and even Stevie and Malcolm's older brother Reese, who was kind of like a jerk bully type of character. He even became friends with him, and their dads even became friends because, like, even though they were different, they had enough in common where they could be friends.
Except in that one episode where Reese threatens to beat Stevie up, and so Stevie basically gets this like bionic suit. I sorry, I really loved Malcolm in the Middle, so that was immediately what
Yeah, it
popped
was a
in my.
great show. And like, even though he was in a wheelchair, like they would often include him on like a lot of their like adventures, like when they would go to explore like the sewer, or they would sneak out and go to the carnival,
Hmm.
or if they were there's one episode where they were going into puberty and Stevie and Reese basically snuck off to visit a girls' camp in the middle of their summer trip.
And not for nothing, but in terms of actual meaningful representation, Stevie was a pretty big deal because, and I'm speaking for myself here, for a lot of people for a long time, there was an inherent assumption that if you were physically disabled, you were also mentally disabled. Now, not to toot my own horn here, but I certainly was a lot closer to Malcolm and Stevie's level of intellect than to the average stereotypical mentally deficient kid. So it was very good, I think, for what little representation actually does matter for people to know, oh, hey, someone can be disabled even from birth physically and not be disabled mentally, let alone that someone can be physically disabled from birth and be rather high functioning, not just normal, but actually above normal. And I guess also Stephen Hawking helped that with the whole Lou Gehrig's disease thing as well. But you get what I'm saying. It was I didn't really think of it much at the time, and I didn't really even think of it until just now. But come to think of it, that was actually an important thing for average Joe and Jane public to realize that physical disability doesn't necessarily mean um, deficient intelligence, and even
Yeah.
sometimes you can get an overlap between high intelligence and disability.
Yeah, the thing is, like, even though like he was disabled and had like other things, like he had a breathing problem and he had allergies. Like, even though he had those things, he still wanted to be out there in the action as much as anybody else. He still wanted to have those dumb and kind of dangerous adventures right alongside the rest of the boys.
And he was capable of doing so. Remember the street luge episode?
I don't remember. It's been a while since it's been a couple years since I watched Malcolm in the Middle.
Well, there was this phenomenon of street luging, which is basically like a full body skating type thing. And turns out, the boys get into street luging, and they keep losing to this one masked street luger. And at the end of the episode, we find out it was Stevie all along.
That'd be that's cool. I didn't see that, but I have to go back and watch it. There's also one episode where like there's this bully. He was basically picking on everybody around, and Stevie basically uses his disability to pretend to be hurt, and tell everybody
Yeah,
says, "You beat up a kid in a wheelchair. What kind of
yeah,
monster
yeah,
are
yeah.
you?"
The
He's
the, the
like,
inherent oh shit moment, which I
he's
can
like he
confirm
plays
as
the
a
hell
as
out
a
of that
disabled
guy.
person, that is definitely a thing. A lot of people who probably would have probably would have beaten me up if I were quote unquote normal, probably abstain from doing so largely because I was disabled. It's not fair, but it's a thing that happened.
Like he had disabilities, but he was not like weak and feeble like everybody would assume he was.
Yeah, and nor did they ever use his race as a political talking point or philosophical like and that's the other thing about the late 80s through the early 2000s. Individual characters were individual characters. They weren't totemic mouthpieces for entire demographics or identity groups.
Yeah, and the thing is, like Malcolm and his brothers, like obviously they acknowledged the fact that he couldn't walk, but once they realized that he was a lot like them, like they just found a ways around his disability, and then they kept going on adventures anyway.
Yeah,
Like they didn't
it
like
was it was sort of a okay. So we need to make sure we can bring Stevie along to do this, and then once we figured out how to do that, sure.
yeah.
And I will say this also. One of the virtues of my friends is very often I didn't have friends for the majority of high school, really. I sat alone by myself a lot of time. But starting in junior year, I actually did have quite a lot of friends because my school had merged with one of the other schools in the district that had closed, and as a result, there was like an influx of a whole bunch of new kids, and in those kids, I found a lot of friends. And very often, my friends will go out of their way to make sure, for example, when they rent a car or something, they will make sure that it's accessible so that I can come along. And I've always appreciated that most of my friends I never even had to bring up or ask that about the thing. At most, what would happen is they would ask me, okay, what accommodations do you need so we can bring you along? And then I would just say so, and then it was not really a thing. But yeah, most of the time, my friends wouldn't even make a thing of it. They would just already handle it, and then it was a thing, which was definitely something that I benefited from in my later high school days, and in particular in my college days, because obviously colleges are a little bit more accommodating in general. But yeah, I managed to make some really good friends over the years, and obviously I'm pretty sure most of my friends here on the YouTube would also uh, do something similar in the event that
Yeah,
we ever actually met up in real life. But you know,
yeah,
that's it.
definitely.
That's a different story. That's a different story for another time. But back on point. The point being is I find it absolutely absurd that social justice as a whole, or like this neo-Hegelian ideology as a whole, seems to want to pretend that the '90s never happened, like the late '80s, through the '90s and into the 2000s, that period that we all grew up in. Apparently, it never happened. Apparently, we all just dreamed of this period where there was diverse characters all over the place and nobody gave a fuck because they were individual characters with their own individual like qualities and merits and shit.
Yeah, it's like, and they also don't see how the things they advocate for and the actions that they take have knock-on effects just beyond the initial thing that they do, and they also don't seem to care how it's going to be perceived by people outside their circle. Like they are
Well,
causing so much more damage to the groups that they proclaim to care about than literally anything their opponents are actually doing right now.
well, because they literally think that the ideology is more important. The academic conception of these identities is more important than the on the ground people who hold these identities, which is why you've been called internalized white. I've been called internalized straight or internalized able or like the the whole conceit of internalized self hatred as a thing is basically just an accusation of you've been turned against your own kind and you have Stockholm syndrome. That's all it really amounts to in the fullness of the thing. It's just a way of saying, oh, you don't agree with this academic preconception we have of you? Well, then you're obviously being your identity wrong. One would think that in a sane world, if you actually cared about these groups or these identities, you would tailor the identity to the people, not try the other way around. But we don't live in a sane world. We live in apparently bizarre world where if you just if you are an outlier of our academic preconception of you, then you must be the problem. You must have Stockholm syndrome. It can't possibly be that we ever made a mistake while we were creating the academic conception in the first place.
Hmm. All right, so we've been going for a bit over an hour. Do you have any final thoughts?
Just keep in mind that even people who hate you, or even people who you don't ideologically align with, are people, especially if they're men, because quite frankly, if those of us who give a shit about men don't remind each other of that, no one is going to care for those men. And the fewer men the fewer people that care about men, the more suicide bombers and serial killers and um incel people we get. The more people we shun and shame and morally ostracize, the more people are going to come back to the village and burn it down, as the old saying goes. And we can solve it all by reminding each other that everyone is human.
Yeah. Well, my last words would essentially be that Do not sacrifice yourself for people who do not care about you.
That too. Maybe sometime, maybe the next time they ask you to slay the dragon, you can ask yourself, is it worth it?
Yeah. All right. I've been Mr. E.
I've been Dalton Mortimer, the Authenticator, and we have been the Duality of Men. Cheers, guys.
Goodbye, everybody.